Have you ever wondered what happens when the Supreme Court tells Congress or the President, "You cannot break the Constitution"? This is not just theory. In 1803, the case of Marbury v. Madison set the foundation for the power of judicial review, a principle that still governs how laws in America are applied today. It determined that the Supreme Court has the ultimate authority to declare laws unconstitutional, shaping the balance of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The story begins in one of the most politically charged periods in U.S. history, the election of 1800. John Adams, a Federalist, faced off against Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic-Republican candidate. After a bitter contest, Jefferson emerged victorious. The transition of power was tense. Adams and his party feared losing influence entirely and sought to secure Federalist control over the judiciary before Jefferson took office. In the final days of his presidency, Adams and the outgoing Federalists made what would later be called the Midnight Appointments. They rushed to fill as many judicial positions as possible, including judgeships and clerks, trying to cement Federalist influence in the courts. One of these appointments was William Marbury, designated as a Justice of the Peace in the District of Columbia. Adams signed the commission and left it to be delivered. Here's where the conflict begins. When Jefferson assumed office, his Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to deliver several of these commissions, including Marbury's. Jefferson argued that the appointments were invalid or unnecessary, while Marbury believed he had a legal right to his commission. Marbury did what any citizen might do when their legal right is denied. He petitioned the Supreme Court for a writ of mandamus, asking the court to order Madison to deliver his commission. Essentially, he was asking the highest court in the land to enforce what he saw as a rightful appointment. The case presented a complex legal puzzle. Chief Justice John Marshall faced a situation with no easy answer. On one hand, Marbury clearly had a legal claim. On the other, issuing the writ could provoke a political confrontation with the president, potentially undermining the court's authority. Marshall's genius was in turning this delicate situation into a foundational moment for American constitutional law. Rather than siding purely with Marbury or challenging Jefferson directly, he framed the case in terms of the Constitution itself. The question became, does the Supreme Court have the authority to declare a law passed by Congress unconstitutional? The specific law in question was part of the Judiciary Act of 1789, which had granted the Supreme Court the power to issue writs of mandamus in cases like Marbury's. On the surface, this seemed straightforward. Marbury could indeed seek a writ. However, Marshall noticed a critical problem. The provision of the Judiciary Act giving the court this power conflicted with the Constitution. The Constitution defines the original and appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Marshall concluded that Congress could not expand the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction beyond what the Constitution allowed. Therefore, while Marbury had a right to the commission, the court could not issue the writ because the law itself was unconstitutional. On February 24, 1803, the Supreme Court issued its decision. Chief Justice Marshall wrote the opinion that has become legendary. He stated that Marbury indeed had a right to the commission, but the court could not enforce it through a writ of mandamus because the relevant part of the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. This was the first time the Supreme Court had struck down a law passed by Congress, establishing the principle of judicial review. It was a masterstroke. The court avoided a direct political clash while asserting its ultimate authority over the Constitution. Why does this matter? Judicial review became a cornerstone of the American legal system. Every law passed by Congress, every executive action taken by the president, could be evaluated against the Constitution. The Supreme Court, and by extension the federal judiciary, became the guardian of the Constitution. This case ensured that no branch of government could exceed the powers granted to it by the Constitution. It was a powerful assertion of the rule of law, a lesson that resonates even in modern American politics. The legacy of Marbury versus Madison is everywhere. From controversies over presidential executive orders to debates on the constitutionality of laws, the principle established in 1803 guides decisions to this day. It empowers courts to check Congress and the president when necessary, protecting citizens' rights and the integrity of the legal system. Even today, every time a Supreme Court case challenges a law or executive action, the roots trace back to this single, pivotal decision. It is, in essence, the birth of judicial review in the United States. Let's pause and consider Marbury himself. A relatively obscure man thrust into history, he probably had no idea the larger consequence of his legal claim. His personal battle, denied delivery of a commission, became the most famous law case in U.S. history because Chief Justice Marshall's reasoning transformed an individual grievance into a national doctrine that protects every American. This is a prime example of how one seemingly small action, a withheld commission, can ripple across centuries and shape the legal framework of an entire nation. By this point, you can already see several key points. 1. Marbury had a legal right to his appointment, but legal right alone does not guarantee enforcement if statutory law conflicts with the Constitution. 2. Marshall prioritized the Constitution over immediate political pressures, solidifying judicial authority. 3. Judicial review was born, giving the judiciary power to interpret the law and strike down unconstitutional actions. These lessons are not just historical. They define modern American governance. Marbury versus Madison did more than resolve a single dispute over a withheld commission. It established a principle that shapes every corner of American law. Judicial review ensures that no law or action by the President or Congress can exceed the authority granted by the Constitution. It protects citizens from arbitrary power, guaranteeing that the rules of the nation are upheld fairly and consistently. Every case that challenges a law's constitutionality, every Supreme Court decision that interprets the balance of power between branches of government, traces its roots directly to this single historic ruling. The impact of Marbury versus Madison continues in modern courtrooms. When controversial laws are passed or executive orders are challenged, courts rely on the precedents set by Chief Justice Marshall. For example, debates over civil liberties, healthcare laws, environmental regulations, or presidential powers are all framed within the principle of judicial review. Understanding this case gives Americans insight into why courts can act as a check on political authority, protecting rights that could otherwise be overlooked or ignored. Marbury versus Madison also teaches an essential lesson about the power of individuals in history. William Marbury may have only sought a personal remedy, but the Supreme Court's response transformed his private grievance into a cornerstone of democracy. It is a reminder that ordinary events and decisions can have extraordinary consequences when they intersect with principle and governance. Every American, whether a student learning civics or a citizen following current events, benefits from understanding this precedent. It shapes how laws are applied, how freedoms are protected, and how government power is constrained. As we reflect on Marbury versus Madison, consider its relevance in everyday life. When laws are challenged in court, when the Supreme Court deliberates on the constitutionality of actions, or when citizens exercise their rights knowing they are protected by the Constitution, the echoes of this 1803 decision are present. It reminds us that the Constitution is not just a historical document but a living framework that governs our society. The judiciary, empowered by judicial review, plays a vital role in ensuring justice, fairness, and adherence to the rule of law. If you found this story enlightening, take a moment to subscribe to the channel for more real court cases that reveal how the law shapes our daily lives. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the power of the Supreme Court? Have you ever wondered how judicial decisions affect your rights? Like the video if you learned something new, and check the description for sources, full court opinions, and related stories. By following the channel, you will uncover how historical decisions like Marbury versus Madison continue to protect Americans today and guide our understanding of government, law, and personal rights.